Hi there, this is Tis and Pete. We recently completed the Viking ocean cruise, the Greek Odyssey. We've done a lot of Viking river cruises before, but this was our first sea cruise. We've put together a little presentation here to record our experience and maybe throw in a little bit of information that would help you enjoy yours should you choose to do it. This was a 10-night cruise visiting the places listed here. One or two of these we'd been to before, but most we hadn't. The ship, well, it was amazing. The photograph doesn't really do it justice actually, and we'll say more about that a little bit later in the presentation. So moving on, let's have a look at what we did on the first day. Our first day was spent in Athens, and we started off with a little look round the Olympic Stadium and then onto the Acropolis, which is marvellous. It's a bit of a climb, a little bit more of a climb than they made out in the preamble actually, and of course you are climbing up marble steps which can be a bit slippery, so you need to have the right footgear, but it really is worth the effort. The photos here don't really do it justice. It was a great experience and well worth a little bit of effort in the climb. After the Acropolis itself, we did the new Acropolis Museum. Very good. Our guide, incidentally, was excellent, both around the Acropolis and around the museum, told us enough without going into too much detail and let the exhibits talk for themselves. We had a good amount of time there, but really it was so interesting we could have done with even longer. But still, a very good visit, definitely worth the time and trouble. Can highly recommend it. The second day we did an optional trip. We went to the monasteries in Meteora. This was really quite mind-blowing. The scenery was incredible and so were the monasteries. It was a little bit of a drive to get there, but not too bad, and there were quite a few steps to climb, but everybody seemed to cope perfectly well. And my word, the views were amazing. It was a really interesting experience. Lovely monasteries, but great rock formations and scenery as well. These pictures give you an idea of the scenery, the rock formations and some of the caves you can see down in the bottom right. Trip also included lunch, which was very nice too, so all in all it was a really good, memorable day out. Next up was a tour of Thessaloniki. This was in three parts really. There was a little walk around the port area, which was very interesting and really quite undemanding because obviously it was all flat and level. Secondly, there was a look round the museum, which I have to say I thought was superb. It's modern, it's not enormous, but it's extremely well laid out and the exhibits are amazing. Then the third part of the trip, after a tour of the town, we went up to the fortifications on the high ground at the end. These were, needless to say, very spectacular too. Great views, not too much of a climb because the bus took us up there. If you want to go into the tower though, there is an extra charge to do that. We weren't told about this and we couldn't go because we hadn't got any cash. So if you want to do that, just be warned. It wasn't expensive, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but you do need to take a bit of cash if you want to go in there. We also got a look around the major church in the town. That was very interesting too. Some beautiful decoration as you can see here, and an interesting crypt area too, which is what you can see in the main photograph. Definitely worth a look round. Now time for a few words about the ship itself. I'm not going to go into details about all the facilities because the brochures do that, but I will pick on one or two of the things that Tis and I especially liked. One of them is the fact that there were plenty of quiet areas you could sit to watch the sunset or the world go by. The Explorer's Lounge was a good example of what I'm talking about, which is where you can see Tis in the picture there. Another thing we liked were the lectures. There were quite a few of these. It worked out about one a day, and they were linked with where we were going and what excursion we were going to do the next day. All was very interesting, not too long, professionally well presented. Definitely worth a look if you get the chance. Plenty of bars. We enjoyed our cocktails. You can see us there with a rock lobster, I think, and also on the sun deck taking in the weather. It was beautiful, incidentally. It was a great time of year to go because it wasn't too hot. One of the things that's kept us loyal to Viking over the years is the quality of the food. It's always been excellent. On the ship here it didn't disappoint. In fact, if anything, it was even better than usual because the ship is bigger, it has more restaurants and you have more choice. We tried all the restaurants during the time there. We actually liked the ship standard restaurant best of all, but everybody has their own particular favourite. They're all very good, so go along and make up your own choice. Worth doing the drinks package. If you like a tipple like we do, you are on the ship a little bit longer on a sea cruise than you are on the river one, so you do get through a little bit more. The quality of the drink was excellent, and afterwards we really agreed that the money we'd spent on the drinks package was well worth it. Something for you to think about maybe. The one day we had in Turkey involved a trip to Ephesus. This was brilliant. If you've not been before, it's great. If you have been before, it's still worth going to again. We had a very good guide. The trip is included, but we paid a bit extra to go to the Roman houses, which you'll see in a minute. Very good guide, very clear. We were there just the right amount of time as well, and it wasn't too demanding walking wise either. Having said that, the climb up the theatre steps is a bit demanding, but the views make it worth it. A lot of people choose not to do this, and if you've got a bit of vertigo in the genes, it's probably a good idea not to bother, but you can still go down on the stage and admire the spectacular architecture. It's great. Also, you can just see some of the houses. That's the bottom picture. That's what we paid extra for. These are really great, but it does involve quite a lot of steps, some of them quite steep if you want to go through this. Also, about vertigo, some of it is a little bit high if you're a bit bothered about that, but really very good and certainly worth the extra we paid to go and see. Now, back to the Greek islands and a visit to Rhodes. This consists of a tour of the town, not all that big actually, and then a walk up the hill to the Palace of the Grand Masters. Very interesting. This was completely rebuilt in the 1920s, so it's not actually very original, but it does contain some interesting things, particularly the mosaics. Not just the mosaics, but the story of how they got them there is very interesting, and place is definitely worth a visit. The best bit of the day for us was the wall walk. This was a bit undersold by Viking really, who just sort of mentioned it in passing, but actually it was really worth doing. You enter it through the Palace of the Grand Masters. It was about €3 each to do it, and it's 3/4 of a mile or so. On the level, fairly easy to walk, but the views make it well worthwhile. Really worth doing if you can. Next came Santorini, and I have to say at the outset that this was probably our least favourite day. Why was that? Well, in the first place, we'd always wanted to see Santorini, and so had the rest of the world. It was extremely busy, and the photographs here somehow don't actually show just how crowded it was, and bearing in mind that we weren't even there at peak season, it does make you wonder what it must get like some of the time. The other thing about it, lots of nice boutiques, lots of nice glamorous little hotels, but really not very much real Greece there, you didn't feel. Nevertheless, the views are spectacular, and if you've not been before, it's worth going. Looking at the pictures here, you're probably wondering what I'm moaning about. There's no doubt that the scenery is marvellous. However, one problem is that Viking aren't allowed to use their tenders to get folks ashore to Santorini. They have to use the locals. When we transferred, The sea was quite choppy and we were tossed about a bit in those boats. It's a fairly long transfer, about 25 minutes, and one or two people were really quite ill by the time we got there. Didn't start the day off very well. When we went back it was a bit calmer, so it was easier. I have to say I would do this entire Greek Odyssey again, but the one thing I wouldn't do would be Santorini. I'd stay on the ship and enjoy the marvellous views from there. And now on to the island of Crete. Tis and I had been here before, but not to Chania, where we visited this time. The day consisted of a tour of the town and then a bit of time to yourself to explore the harbour and the surrounding area. Very nice. Bit of an issue, the guide I have to say was not very good, couldn't really keep the party together, and English wasn't brilliant. Didn't spoil it for us, but it would have been better with somebody just a little bit more on the ball. The harbour area was really pleasant and we had plenty of time to explore it. For lunch we were tempted to go local, but of course the food on the ship is so good that it drew us back there. So a very nice session. Despite my misgivings about the guide, it was still a very worthwhile trip. Some classical history on the last day, with a visit to the rock tombs at Mycenae. A bit of advice here: if your guide has verbal diarrhea like ours had and spent half an hour talking through the first 100 yards from the gate, it might be an idea to find a meeting time with her or him and then walk on and explore yourself. There's plenty of explanatory placards around the place and you will see a lot more that way. You also will get some time to visit the excellent museum, which we were left with about 10 minutes at the end to run around, and it really deserved a bit more than that. So consider doing that. I think it might help you make the best of the visit. Well, the guide may have been mediocre, but the scenery and the architecture most certainly wasn't. Really interesting, definitely worth the trip. Just about the right amount of time there as well, and we got there fairly early. That's important because it was getting really busy by the time we left. Well worth the trip though. Back from the tombs we had time to explore the town of Nafplio. This actually was probably the most interesting single town we saw on the entire trip because it was the most unspoiled and the most originally Greek. Highlight for me was a walk up the 999 steps to the citadel at the top. What the Viking brief didn't tell you was that if you didn't fancy doing the 999 steps, you can actually access the wonderful views by getting a taxi and going round a back road that takes you to the top the easy way. When you do get there, well, the views are great. Even the local wildlife, the tortoise here, who I saw just idly strolling along the path. A great part of any Viking trip are the people you meet, and we met some lovely ones in the course of our week. Special mention to the musicians, who were brilliant, and we listened to an awful lot during the course of our time there. Staff, amazing, and of course fellow passengers. I'd like to give a special mention to Ed and Sheila. You can see Ed and Sheila in the top picture there, with Tom, one of the head honchos from Viking, who we actually shared dinner with one evening, which was a bit special. And also a mention for Dita and Savio. They were great fun. We met them on the first night and saw them on and off throughout the week. It was lovely to get to know them. Staff were amazing, and all in all it was a most fantastic trip. I'd gladly do the whole thing again. As it is, it's Bangkok to Bali next time. Hopefully we'll put together a little presentation to see how we get along there. Thanks for listening. Hope you found it useful. Bye bye.